So I'm finally getting around to working on this Partner or Husqvarna K750. It's a concrete cutoff saw. And I wanted to make this video for a couple reasons. One, these things are a little different to work on, and if you've never worked on one before, they're put together a little bit differently than some of the other concrete saws out there. So I've already taken liberty of starting to disassemble this thing. I decided to take off the starter recoil, the top part of the air box. It's just these 3 Torx screws. Take those out. Here's the filter. Remove that as well. And then you'll have this little rubber piece that comes out up here. You want to scrunch that together and stick it back through the hole. And then there's a total of 4 more Torx screws on this piece here. So you get that out of the way. And now here we have the carburetor. You don't have to worry about anything in here. You can just leave that little filter screen on. But in order to get this carb off, you're going to be sitting here trying to cuss this thing and figure it out if you've never taken one of these apart before. But first you want to remove this little linkage from the trigger right here. And you can do that with a flashlight and a pair of needle nose. What you do is you just lock it down and have it out like that, and then with your needle nose just pull it right out of the slot. Just be really careful not to break anything. It is a plastic trigger in there. But this is the lone bolt that's holding the intake manifold onto the side of the cylinder. It's another Torx screw, and you can access it through that little hole that they provided. And I was just able to undo this and carefully pull everything back. Very different design. I haven't seen this sort of design on the steel concrete saw I've worked on before. It's definitely interesting, but I'm actually in the process of replacing this carburetor and redoing some of the fuel lines, which is kind of a pain in the ass, but it needs to be done. So now from here on out we have a fuel line here that is cracked and messed up that I'll have to remove, and I think that's it actually. Doesn't matter anyways, it just completely broke off. But there's the inside of the cylinder, and one thing that's always good to look at is check and see what kind of condition the side of the skirt is in on the piston, and this one seems to look okay, so I'm not really too worried about that. But I do have a brand new carburetor I'm going to put on this thing. That was what the owner wanted to do instead of rebuilding it, so I'm not one to argue with, people and what they want to do with their equipment, but, they are paying me for it. So I'm going to go ahead and throw that new carburetor on and see what happens. One thing I've learned over the years is sometimes Vaseline kind of helps with getting things lubed up and kind of going and functioning as they should. So I got the new fuel line routed through. The old one is pretty well worn out, needed to be replaced for sure. Haven't done the carburetor just yet, but there's also a weight down in here that I want to show you guys. And it only makes sense that it's got one, but you just want to push it down like that, and then the fuel line will actually keep it on there. So now that this has been dealt with, all we got to do is just pop the filter right back into its hole. And I left this line as long as it is specifically because this is going to make it easier to reinstall the carburetor, size everything up properly, and then hook this line up kind of after the carburetor is all situated. So with the new carburetor in place, I've got both of these bolts going through, and really not too much else going on here, but we will go ahead and start kind of piecemealing this thing back together. It's kind of a weird, interesting design the way they've gone through and put this thing together, but you want to make sure that this linkage goes back over this when you install it. It is kind of a pain in the ass dealing with this whole thing, but this whole thing needs to come out as one unit. So you undo these 2 Torx bolts here at the bottom, and then these 2 here at the top, and it should come right out after that. So now to reinstall, it's pretty much just the reverse. That gasket's okay. And I'm just making sure that I'm going to go her in nice and easy. And so with the linkage reinstalled, we can not worry about these just yet, but we can go ahead and reinstall this back onto the saw. And at the same time, we will size up that fuel line. I just made sure that the filter was in fact all the way down where it should be. So I'll give it a little bit of slack just because that makes install and the eventual removal pretty easy. So I'll cut off a little bit extra, or leave a little bit extra for it, just in case I got to cut it. So let's stick it on, and might have to cut off a little bit of that slack, but I'd rather have to cut off some slack than, you know, basically change it from there. And of course this little guy fell off, so throw him back on. So reinstalling that linkage that goes to the trigger, it's kind of a pain in the ass. You know, a lot of things on this thing seem to be that case, but I just got it reinstalled back in. You just snap it back into place. Again, just take your time. If you've never really dealt with one of these before, they can really be a bear. So it's pretty much the home stretch now. All we have to do is just bolt everything back together. I'll do another tertiary check of all the lines and everything, but it's looking like right now that everything's working properly. The trigger's working fine, but there is one more thing we do need to check, and that is the choke linkage, which reconnects right to the blue choke right there. So that's a lot easier to reinstall than the bottom trigger linkage, so I'm not even going to worry about showing you guys that. And in order to get that trigger back on, you just kind of have to finagle this whole thing in place and kind of watch it from the side. Make sure that your trigger linkage for the throttle doesn't come undone. But everything's working here. No other lines were disconnected, so I'm not really worried about too much else on this. We just have this one bolt to throw the carburetor against the side of the motor. Try and thread that in and cheat a little bit. There we go. And before I button up all the other screws, just make sure that everything's about where it should be. Works for me. There's the filter, which the owner did replace the filter fairly recently. It is kind of dirty, but that's just because of, you know, the environment these tools operate in. And with this part of the cover pulled back enough, you can see what kind of shape the belt's in. And it looks okay, so I'm not really... So everything seems to look okay. Probably would be in his best interest to just change the belt anyways, so I'll advise him to do that. He just wanted me to change out the carburetor, so that's all I did. Nice. Doesn't even need to be tuned. It runs perfectly. These are badass machines. They really are. If I had a need for one, I'd love to have it, but I don't have a need for one of these. So that was actually a lot easier to fix than that steel one that he wanted me to fix. But this thing popped off, of course. Should have known that was going to happen. But I'm just happy that the carburetor's tuned on this thing, and I don't really have to mess with it. It seems to run just fine. Seems to run perfectly. Now, he did tell me when he first gave me this thing to work on that he just kept trying to start this thing, and it just would not start. And after 30 pulls or so, it would finally kick over. So I knew it was a carburetor issue. I did look online a few times for, information on these when I was trying to source a new carburetor for it. And a lot of people were saying on the forums that the carbs on these can be pretty problematic. So he actually uses a full synthetic two-stroke oil that he mixes with his fuel, and it seems to do him pretty well. But hopefully he can keep some fuel stabilizer in it or something, and so he won't have to deal with this again. The carburetor that I put in this thing, I managed to source off eBay for 50 bucks. That's an OEM Zama carb, the exact same one that you could buy from any Husky dealership. And brand new from the dealer, you're looking at north of 100 bucks for that single carb. So I was luckily I was able to find that online for him for a very, very good price. But this thing's ready to go back into the truck and go back to its owner. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'm glad this was a pretty simple fix, and stay tuned for more. You all stay classy.